In today's video, we're going to kind of cover two separate issues. This one with the Fitzgerald. Now, this is the primary issue that started us down the road investigating these so-called accidents that happened in a very short spate of time last summer. Between May and August of 2017, we had 6 different events involving 5 different ships. We lost 19 sailors. 2 ships had to be piggybacked back to, I believe, the U.S., someplace to be repaired. It's going to take years to repair the ships. In 2 other cases, we lost sailors overboard, and after days of searching, couldn't find them. All very suspicious, all coincided with North Korea launching missile after missile and testing nuclear weapons. And they also coincided, these locations, with underwater submarine cable locations and very suspicious things there as well. Now, we've covered everything with the ships, the Fitzgerald, the Maquis, the Lake Champlain, the Statham, and the Normandy. But back here with the Fitzgerald, this is where we had most of the information. Of all of these events, this event has the most information to look at, and one of the most important pieces happened at 0127 hours that morning, 3 minutes prior. The officer of the deck ordered course to the right, course 240 true, but rescinded the order within a minute. Instead, the officer of the deck ordered an increase to full speed and a rapid turn to port. These orders were not carried out. The bosun mate of the watch, a more senior supervisor on the bridge, took over the helm 2 minutes later and executed the order. Now, we can only use what they're telling us here. Either, if it wasn't carried out, either the guy couldn't do it or he refused to do it. That's all I can assume, or didn't have the ability to do it for some reason. Didn't seem like there was any problem changing course prior to this, so this was very, very strange. So looking at this, I remembered that 3 separate times in the press conference given by Admiral O'Coin, he said the event happened at 0220 hours, when clearly this happened at 0130 hours. Even the Japanese said it happened at 0130 hours. And strangely enough, the event wasn't reported until 220, not only independently by the crew of the Crystal, but by the crew of the Fitzgerald. So, never been a big fan of false flag and planning, but when he used that term expected, they performed as we expected. That made me think, and I didn't pay attention to that, so I thought, let's do some, just theorizing here. Now, this is the bend in the cable up here. This is the 190 to 240 location. So I followed, let's say the Crystal wasn't there. Let's say this never happens. And they make their turn to 240. What would occur at 220? Where were they going? Let's follow their track. What were they heading to? And I find a very strange submarine cable anomaly down here. Now, this is 40 nautical miles downrange at 240. This is the cable that they were following between here and here. But out here in the middle of nowhere, right along their line of travel, is a submarine cable section that just begins and ends in the middle of nowhere. And it's about, what's miles long for sure. Let's see, the legend says that's 2 nautical miles right there. So, you say 4 miles? 8 miles maybe? It's really hard to say because the legend, I see, the legend does change. So that would be 4 miles there, so I would say 6-mile long section of submarine cable that begins and ends in the middle of nowhere. And this is where they would have, generally speaking, ended up had they continued down the track 240. And like I said, that's a different section of cable than what they were following, because that's here. And that coincides up here. As you can see, that's what they were following. And as they get down here, what happens is that cable turns. But if they keep going down that track, you find this 6-mile section of just cable that's not connected to anything. It may mean something, it may not mean something. People have mentioned this issue about perhaps it's a rendering error here on the vessel finder map. That could very well be. I find it strange that all of these rendering errors would just so happen to coincide with where the sailor from the Normandy went overboard, where Chinese jets chased off the Statham off Triton Island, where the sailor from the Statham went overboard, where the USS Fitzgerald, the Lake Champlain, and the USS John S. McCain all had their events. These rendering errors just magically appear at these locations. I find that to be a very odd coincidence. So you guys can chew that over and maybe, look into something and see if we find something else with that. I'm not really sure that that means anything, but I just wanted to cover it just to say that I did. I didn't look into the submarine cable issue a long time ago. A long time ago I saw the issue and I didn't even think about it. But then again, we didn't have the track of the Fitzgerald at the time. So I wanted to talk about Venezuela very briefly as we get out here, because there's some things going on, and something popped into my head that came from reading this article. Now, this article here is about, it was a Pan Am podcast, Venezuela on the ropes, Maduro reaches out to Russia, China. We know this story, how the Russians and the Chinese have bailed out the Venezuelans. This story about Rosneft. It's a Russian oil company that now owns the vast majority of the PDVSA. PDVSA is the state-run oil company in Venezuela. Okay, the Russians have a majority vested interest in the PDVSA. Okay, that's very important to know, because down here at the very end of this article, the writer makes this statement. Thus, a more likely endgame in Venezuela now may involve the nation's creditors seizing oil shipments to pay off debts. If that were to happen, it could be the catalyst needed to force Maduro from power, perhaps into exile in Cuba. Okay, here's going to be the problem with that. If some country like Canada, for example, would seize these Venezuelan tankers full of oil, the Venezuelans could say, okay, well, that's an act of war, but so could the Russians. You see, the Russians could lay claim to that and say, hey, look, we now own this. This is our stuff. We refinanced these people. We hold a bunch of their debt, and this tanker was going to be used to pay that debt back to us. If some other nation says, well, sorry, they owed us money first, we're going to take this. The Russians could declare that an act of war, especially if they do it down around the canal. This would be the excuse, all the excuse the Venezuelans would need, and the Russians would need to put Russian military vessels down there for security, to secure their payments and secure their vessels. And that's where I think this is going to go. See, I don't think this is going to be an issue where it's going to be the U.S. versus Venezuela or the Canadians versus Venezuela. It's going to be versus Russia, because they're going to say, look, we're going to get our money one way or the other. The Russians aren't going to let the Canadians seize Venezuelan ships carrying oil when they're owed money. It's just not going to happen. And that's exactly how this is going to go down. Now, one last thing, and it goes to the law of unintended consequences. Now, the U.S. has slapped heavy-duty sanctions on Venezuela because they don't like the regime down there and they want to see it changed. Now, if you make the argument that socialism is bad and will eventually fail in and of itself under its own weight, a country like the United States shouldn't have to do anything. They should just let it fail. But when you do these heavy-duty, heavy-handed sanctions, you give these leaders, these dictator leaders, the weapon they need to go to the people and say, well, look, you wouldn't be suffering if it wasn't for the big evil U.S. And he has the argument of the petrodollar, which even people in the U.S. know that it's completely illegal, what they've done with our money. But law of unintended consequences, this is what he did at the end of the year. He's being seen as more of a hero down there now, because he's basically survived this based on his deal for food with the Russians and with the Chinese, and he's getting support from the Indians as well. His vice president has signed deals for medicine with them. We've covered that. But, last paragraph here. Finally, he reported the government is strongly promoting a new cryptocurrency, the petro, which is backed by the country's natural and mineral wealth, saying the move is a solution that will prevent Venezuela from being the target of financial attacks such as blockades and sanctions. This is how he's going to get the people on his side down there. And the last thing I want to show you, and this is what I meant with unintended consequences, I just want you to watch this video and tell me what you think in the comments. Let's see if I can get this to play. There we go.
Lo que han querido decir los medios, o sea, algunos medios, no todos, por supuesto, que esta moneda es una moneda paralela al Bolívar. Lo único paralelo aquí y criminal es el dólar paralelo.
Un proyecto político donde el pueblo ejerce poder en todos sus sentidos, en todo, desde la producción de sus propios bienes y servicios, en la planificación de sus políticas públicas dentro de la comuna, en la ejecución, en la contraloría, es decir, todo lo que es el ámbito de gobernar para el pueblo bajo una metodología colectiva, asamblearia, oficial.
So, basically what's happening, they got 1,700 communes down there that have decided to go independent and basically work on, they're taking the barter system to the next level and creating their own currency. And with the path that Maduro's taken, that he's survived it, anything that we do now is going to be seen as a direct attack on the people of Venezuela, not Maduro. So 2018 is going to be a dangerous time for this hemisphere. Very, very dangerous time, because some decisions are going to have to be made very, very carefully, or we could end up having a war on our shores. So have a great New Year, folks, and we will see you next time. Like, share, subscribe.